There we go. Okay. So again, today's webinar is on version 8 reports. And as many of you are aware, the reports is really the way that you know that what you're doing or not doing is working. And so the reports become a very integral part of using Retail Pro. The important thing to remember with reports is it's only spitting out the data that you and your staff are plugging into Retail Pro throughout the day. So if you look at a report and a sale looks like it's wrong, it's probably not that the report is wrong, it's probably that that transaction was done incorrectly. Always go out and investigate. If you see something that doesn't jive or doesn't seem right in the report, go look in the data itself and see if you can find the cause of it. And if you can find the cause of it, you can fix it, and then obviously rerun your report, and your report should give you up-to-the-moment information. So from the main screen of Retail Pro, I'm going to go to Analysis and to Reports. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just move this window down a little bit so I can see my buttons. Now, if anyone should have a question, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. I will try to keep an eye out for when questions are asked, and I will try to answer them as quickly as I can. Okay, I'm just going to kind of move this over to the side. And again, I will try to keep an eye out for any raised hands. Now, with version 8 reports, there are 4 main types of reports that you have available: journals, merchandise, summaries, and lists. Now, one of the most helpful things that I found when I first learned reports many years ago was understanding where to start. What type of report do I need to accomplish what I'm looking to accomplish? So I like to start there because they do each have their own unique purpose in the scheme of things. I mean, yes, they're all reports, but they will show you different perspectives of the data. So a list report, pretty straightforward. This is going to give you a list of either departments, vendors, or employees, as well as customers. If it is a field that you can find in the customer database, it is a field that you can put on a list report. Understand, though, that nowhere in the list reports can you get sales information. The closest we can get to sales information would be seeing their last sale date. So, you know, if you're needing a list of all of the customers that spent a certain dollar amount and you want their email address, there's different ways that you'd have to go about doing that. We'd have to look at, say, a summary report to get a list of all of those customers and then go through and flag those customers with a certain mark, and then you could filter in the list reports for that mark, and then you'd have their name and their email address. List reports are probably not going to be a report that we really touch on today. They're not used a great deal, but when you're needing a list of departments or vendors, it's nice to know that you do have the option there to do that. Now, summary reports are probably the most commonly used reports. The vast majority of your sales reports are found in summaries, and summaries are going to give you an overall picture of information. Now, that does not mean that a summary cannot give you specific item detail. It most certainly can, depending on how you build the report. It just means it's not doing any special calculations. It's not going out and looking at the specific transaction necessarily. So it's an overall picture or summary of the information. Now, summaries can be either transactional based or merchandise based. So typical transactional based reports and summaries would be a tender reconciliation, because that's looking at the specific tender information about each receipt. A transactional summary would also be I think the check in and out is a transactional report. There's not very many summary reports that are transactional based. Most of them are merchandise based. And merchandise-based reports are the ones that will show you DCS, vendor code, description 1 and 2, size, color, price, all the basic item information, okay, or merchandise information. Now, summary reports can only look at one area of the system at a time. So if I wanted to see my sales and my receiving as well as my on-hand, yes, I could do it in a summary report, but it would take 3 separate reports, and then I'd have to try to line those up item to item. So it's not a very common way of looking at that. In that case, you would want a merchandise report. Now, true to its name, merchandise reports are strictly based on the merchandise. There is no transactional information in there, meaning if it is a field that you can find in the inventory, it is a field that you can put on a merchandise report. I cannot put receipt number in there. I cannot put customer name on a merchandise report. Neither one of those fields would be found in inventory. So the reason you would use a merchandise report over a summary merchandise report would be if you did want to look at different areas of the system, or what we refer to as data types. So a merchandise report will allow you to look at up to 16 data types on a single report. Now, a data type can either be different areas of the system, like on-hand, sales, receiving, transfers, on order, that type of thing, but it can also be different time frames. So I want to see my sales this year to date compared to sales last year to date. How are my sales doing in comparison to the same time frame? So that's when you would want to use a merchandise report, is when you're typically wanting to do comparisons. You want to compare different areas or different time frames. Now, the last type of report that we have is the journal report. Now, a journal report is a transactional-based report, but it will optionally give you the choice to see the merchandise that were on that transaction. So a journal report is the closest that you can get in reports to reprinting out each receipt or each voucher without having to go into former receipts or former vouchers and print them out one at a time. So if someone were to say, the owner comes to you and says, I need a report that shows me every receipt that bought from a certain department, and I want to know what they bought from that department. Until he tells me I need to see what they bought from that department, once I hear the description, then I know that it has to be a journal report, because the owner is looking for the receipt number, but he also wants to see the specific item that was sold or items that were sold. So understand, though, with a journal report, let's say that the owner wants to see everybody that bought an apparel item. Okay. Now let's say that you have a customer that bought 2 or 3 apparel items, but they also bought some jewelry. Okay. With a journal report, even though you're telling it, only show me the receipts that bought from the apparel department, if they bought something else on that receipt as well, it is going to show those items as well, at least in version 8. In version 9, they did change that. So for those of you that don't like that, know that that could be a pro in your decision to upgrade to version 9. So we're going to start with summaries today. Okay, and I am going to start off, I'm going to make an on-hand report. Okay. Now the on-hand report that comes with the program is this one right here. Okay. Now let me move my columns over a little bit. Now, how I know that that is the original default report is based on the file name. So the file name lets you know what type of report within each report area you're looking at. And what I mean by that is we have 3 types of reports in there. Predefined reports that come straight out of the box as soon as Retail Pro is installed. This report is sitting there waiting for you. That's what this on-hand summary report is. We also have, and those predefined reports end in a 1 through 50 or 49 number right here in the end of the file name. So you'll see this is a predefined report, this is a predefined report, this one. They all end in a 1 through 59 number, okay? Now, the next type is what we call a specialty report, and those will end in a 50 number going up. Very common to see those in your shift reports, okay? So if you look at the shift reports, they all end in a 50 number going up. Those are reports that cannot be copied, they cannot be manipulated, or they can only slightly be manipulated, because if you change them too much, the built-in formulas that make those reports work would no longer work. So like that shift report is doing the calculations of the amount of time that a employee has been clocked in, and it calculates that based, it tells you how many hours they worked based on those formulas. Now, the last type of report is what we call a user-defined report. It is a report that you yourself or someone in your company has made, and those will all end in a 999 number going down. So you see 999, you'll see, like here I have a 987, I have a 997, a 994. All of those are reports that have been created after the initial install. So now what I usually recommend is, because there are so many default reports to choose from, rather than starting over from scratch when you're building a report, see if there's a report that's close to what you're looking for. Now, I'm going to create this on-hand report as a way of seeing what my value, what the value of my inventory is at cost and at retail. So the on-hand report, the on-hand summary by default, unfortunately, does not give me the extended cost or the extended price. It only gives me the unit cost and price, and that's not something that I can subtotal by. So I have one that's close to what I want. I'm going to make a copy of it, relabel it, so I know that it's mine. And I usually try to call it whatever it's going to offer me. Now, I also generally will put some sort of symbol, and I tend to use the exclamation point, put some sort of symbol at the beginning of the name. And the reason for that is computers organize first by symbols, then by numbers, then by letters. The exclamation happens to be the A of the symbols. So when I click OK, because I've put that exclamation there, it's not going to be here alphabetized with the rest of the inventory reports. It's going to go up towards the top of my list. So if I come up here, I can see that, let's go with this one. Obviously, I've made this before. That's what's right above it. So here is the new one that I made, and I only know that because of the date and the time. So now here is my new report, and I'm going to click on Edit. And what I'm actually going to show you to do today is how to create your own reports. There's some basic information in creating a version 8 report that once you get that locked in and you feel comfortable with it, the sky is the limit. You can virtually make any report that you need to make. So we're going to work our way down this right-hand side list over here, starting with layout. Now, layout and sort are probably the two most important pieces of making a report template. The layout is what you're going to see. So these are going to be your column headers. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do, I do not need my D, my C, and my S separated out. So I'm going to combine them into one column. So I see them as a complete code, the same way that I see them when they're in inventory. So I'm going to double click on the D, and you'll see it jumps right below the line. I'm going to double click on the C, and then on the S, and then I'm going to double click on the DCS below the line. You'll see it jumps it right above, and then I'm going to left click and drag it up to the top. So know that this line that you see right here is the breaking point. Anything above that line is going to show up as a column. Anything below that line is not, but a simple double click can move it either direction. So if you're taking things off of your layout, the double click should bring it down below the line. If you're adding fields to your layout, the double click should be bringing it above the line. So I'm also going to get rid of P dollar and C dollar because those are my unit cost and price. I'm running this report to get a value. So for tax purposes or insurance purposes or anything along those lines, I need to know what my entire inventory is worth, not one single item in my inventory. Now, in its place, I am going to put the price and cost field that I want. But before I do that, I'm going to move my item number up because this is the order that I have my descriptions in my inventory. I tend to try to keep it the same way in my reports, just so I have some consistency. Now, I do need to get the cost and the price on there. So up here at the top, there is a find function. You can scroll through this list little by little, but they are not in alphabetical order. So you have to hope that you'll find it. Instead, if you come up to the find function and you type in EXT for extended cost, you'll see that it brings me, the first choice that it brings me is my extended cost. Now, don't let it freak you out if all of a sudden your mouse disappears. It's a fairly common thing. It's just happened to me. Okay? So what happens is your mouse gets hidden behind that drop-down list. So if you just click anywhere on the screen, the list will disappear, and you can then click on this drop-down and go directly to the one that you want. Okay? Now, once I choose it, you'll notice that it brings me right down to where that particular field is. So I'm going to double-click it, and it will look like it disappears, but we'll find that it went right above the line. I also want extended price. Now, yes, I could come up here to the find and scroll down to extended price, but it happens to be right there near the extended cost, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that as well. Okay, now I'm going to scroll back up, and you can see that those two fields have been added. I'm going to just place them where I want to see them. So I see all of the item description, then I see how many I have on hand, what its extended cost is, its extended price, what the margin is, and I see the last date that it's sold. Now, this last date sold, if I need to make room, this is probably going to be the first thing that I get rid of. Okay? But if you have room and you want to see that information, feel free to leave it there. So I now have my layout, the way that I want this report to be laid out, what I want to see as column headers. I'm now ready to go to the sort. Now, like I said, the layout and the sort are probably the two most important portions of the template. Whereas the layout is what you're going to see, the sort is how you're going to see it. Now, what that basically means, I'm going to make my DCS the combined total again. Okay, put that back up to the top. So what it's going to do, the more you put in your sort, the more item detail you get. So what's going to happen first is it's going to alphabetize by my DCSs. So when it comes across two items that have the same DCS, it's going to look to see if the vendor code is different. If the vendor code is different, it will separate those out into two separate lines. If the vendor code is not different, it's going to look to see if the description 1 is different. If that's not different, it's going to work its way down this list until it gets to item number. Now, when it gets to item number, every single item should have a unique item number. So having item number in the last place actually works to my advantage rather than putting it into the first spot. If I want to see my item numbers in sequential order, the way they would be if I was sorting by item number in the inventory, then yes, I would move my item number up. Okay? Kind of a good rule of thumb when you're first learning to make reports is make your sort match the descriptive fields in your layout. So if we go back and we look at the layout, I have, other than item number, I have DCS, vendor code, description 1, 2, attribute, and size. Then I hit the value field. So I'm going to stop at size. I look at the sort. I have the same thing with the exception of putting item number last. I don't want them in sequential order number based on the item number. I want them grouped by a similar department or a similar vendor. So usually I would put one of those two first. Okay. Now, there may be some reports that you do something like this. Okay, so you have the DCS there, and it will break it out, but in your layout, you told it that you want all of this specific item information. So what would happen in that case is it's going to show you one line for the item that belongs, the first item that belongs in that DCS, and the vendor code, description 1, 2, all of those fields would also be based on that first line in your department code. So, like I said, when you're first learning to build reports, it's really kind of a good rule of thumb to make your sort match your layout. Sort deals only with descriptive fields, not with value fields. And we'll discuss in just a moment how to deal with value fields. Okay? Now, any questions about layout and sort? Because they are so important, I want to make sure that everybody understands how those work. Okay? So let's go ahead and go on to the totals then. Now, totals is probably the one area that I hear people tell me the most often, this screen confuses me, or I can't make heads or tails of this screen. And maybe it's because I've been doing this so long, I don't see it anymore. But if you look at this as, look, each gray line is the top of a new section. So look at it as 4 separate sections. Okay? Now, the first section is subtotal, run total, when. When do I want the computer to give me a subtotal? Well, in my case, I'm going to have it give me a subtotal when my DCS changes. So when I go from apparel women's to apparel men's, I want to get a subtotal of the apparel women. When I go from apparel men's to apparel kids, I want to see a subtotal when that changes departments. Okay? So that's section 1. Generally speaking, in this section, I don't usually recommend that you subtotal by more than 2 things on any given report. Otherwise, it does start to get confusing as to which subtotal is going with which grouping. It's kind of hard to read your report the more you subtotal by. Now, if you have chosen a subtotal, run total, when, you have to give it a subtotal what or a run total what. Now, you'll see right now, we have quantity above the line right here in the subtotal what. I also want to get a subtotal of cost and price. So I can either double click it or I can drag the line down underneath all of them. So for every single item on my report, I'm going to know how many we have on hand and what the total value of that item is in my entire inventory, as well as getting a grand total of how much all of my inventory is, no matter what department. Now, run total what? It can be used with the subtotal, run total, when. In run total, run total would be, I'm going to take apparel women and add it with apparel men. Then I'm going to take that total and add it with apparel kids. Then I'm going to take that total and add it with apparel unisex. Okay, so it's going to give me a running tally or running total of my departments the further I go down the report. Okay, so I can honestly tell you, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I've only seen this used a few times. Most retailers don't run their business based on a grouping of departments or a grouping of vendors. So most retailers that I've worked with do not use the run total very often. So that's section 3. Section 4 is the grand total what. Now, grand total what is exactly like what it sounds like. This is going to be a grand total on the bottom of our finished report. So I want to put everything above the line because I need a grand total for insurance purposes. Okay, the insurance company or the accountant doesn't care how many I'm carrying in apparel women or how many I'm carrying in apparel men. I care about it, but my tax guy doesn't. My tax guy just needs to know what is the entire inventory worth because that's what I'm going to pay taxes on. Okay, so 4 separate sections, each has their own purpose. Now the next button we come to over here on the side is the ranking button. Now ranking is very, very similar to sorting, except it deals only in value fields and only in the value fields that you've put in your layout. So you'll notice I only have quantity, extended cost, and extended price. Now, if you use ranking, it will supersede sorting. And most commonly, ranking is used when you're going for a bestseller or a worst seller type report where you want the top item on your report to be the one with the highest quantity or the highest price or whatever you decide is, your best-selling item. So now let's say that the item that I have the most on hand of actually is in a department Z. Well then, because quantity or price or cost, ranking supersedes sorting, it's going to put them in order based on the value we tell it. And then if it comes across 2 values that have the same number, so I have 2 items that both have an on-hand quantity of 10, then it's going to look at the sorting. It's going to say, okay, which department code comes alphabetically? Then it's going to start to go alphabetically down our sort list. Okay? We're not going to use it for this report, but know that all you have to do is double-click it. Now you'll notice there is an arrow there. That arrow pointing down, think of this as your top seller going down to your bottom seller. So the arrow is going down the list. If you want to see a worst seller, the only difference between best and worst is the direction of this arrow. Turn the arrow around. This would now be a worst on-hand number. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and put it back the other way and take it out of there. Now, the next button that we get to is the options button. Now, the options button kind of holds all those miscellaneous, they don't quite fit anywhere else type of settings. So you will see that it shows you your report name. So if you wanted or needed to rename it, you could at this point. It also shows you the access level of who's going to be able to see this report. If you want everyone in your organization to see this report, make it a level 4. Everybody gets to see level 4 reports, even part-time cashiers. Okay? Now, it can be anywhere in between. Typically, I generally reserve sysadmin access and access level 1 for the administrators or the accountants because I don't necessarily want everybody and their mother seeing my accounting reports. Okay? I'm going to leave it on sysadmin because that's all I have in my system. Now, the subtitle, you can use this for anything that you find it's helpful for. I have used it when I want to remind somebody that's running the report where that information gets stored. I've used it when the name I want to give the report doesn't quite fit in the name field. But you can use it for anything you want. It does print on the top of the report, like your date and all of that does. It also is one of those things that will show up when you go to run the report, and it can be changed on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so that's your subtitle. The filter that I'm using here is a default inventory filter, meaning this came with the program when they installed it. Now, it's totally okay to use the default filter if you want, but don't make any permanent changes to it, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to leave it on the inventory. The orientation It can go portrait and landscape. I happen to know that this report needs to go landscape. Okay. The non-repeat mode. Non-repeat mode would allow would when it runs the report, if the first 10 items on the report are all from the same department, it's only going to print the department on the first line and then leave it blank underneath it. If we set this to yes, or no, if we set it to no, it's going to repeat it every single line. If we set it to yes, then it would not repeat itself. Okay? And I'll show you what that looks like both ways. Now, the record limit really only comes into play when you're dealing with bestseller or worst seller type reports. So you may find that you don't use it a great deal. Okay? But you could put in there, I want to see my top 50 or my bottom 100 or my top 10. You're giving the computer or retail pro the limit that you want to see. I don't want to see any more than this many records on my report. Okay? Now, the price level, for those of you that are using multiple price levels, you probably are aware of it. And because this is an inventory report, the different price levels and different prices that belong to those levels are part of the inventory information. So you can say, I want the prices that I see on my report to be based on this price level. Okay. Now I'm going to base it on my retail because that's really the only price level I have. I'm set up to use other price levels, but I don't actually use them. Okay. The min-max type, if you've added that to your report, can be based on store or company. Okay. And for those of you using min-max, you probably know whether you're using company or store min-max. Now, the total analysis of the quantities can also be based on store and company. Now, because I have a single store, my store and my company numbers are one and the same. So it does, for me, it doesn't matter if I set it to store or company, I'm going to get the same results. Okay? For those of you that have multiple stores, these definitely, the min-max type and the total analysis definitely come into play. Okay? And when it's looking at the quantity, it's basing that quantity on the on-hand versus the on-hand plus in transit. Now, for those of you that have multiple stores, you might be familiar with what in transit is because it is only used by multiple stores. And that would be the time that merchandise, if you're set up this way, in transit is the time that merchandise is being transferred between stores is actually not at either one of the locations. It's kind of in a limbo. It's in transit. You shipped it out with UPS from New York. You're delivering it to Seattle. It's going to take some time to get there. It's not going to happen immediately. That time that it's traveling from East Coast to West Coast would be considered in transit time. It's not technically at either location at that time. So you could have the quantity look at the items that are in transit at the same time because they're not physically on hand yet, but they're on their way to you and they will be on hand once they get there. Okay? So that brings us to the end of the options page for this particular type of report. Okay? Now this edit filter down here. Edit filter, remember we are using a default filter here. So if I edit this filter in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to be altering the default filter that other reports are potentially using. So be very, very careful with this. I always tell people, feel free to add additional things to the elements, what you can filter by. Okay, so I might want to add that in there. I want description 3 and 4 in there. And I can do that. I can add in whatever fields I want to be able to filter by, but I want to caution you, do not set up the criteria. For your report, you have, let's say you're running this report for a very specific vendor, a very specific department, and so you come over here and you set it for this vendor code that you want to look at. The problem is, by you doing it in the edit mode and edit filter, you are going to affect every other report in there that is using this default filter. I cannot even begin to tell you the number of times that I have taken a tech call where somebody says, oh, my reports are wrong. Okay, I ran my report just like I always do and it's wrong. And I get in there and I look at their filter, and their filter is, from the get-go, is not clear. And I will ask them, did you put that into the filter? And I 99% of the time get, I had no idea that was in the filter, leading me to believe that somebody else in their company made a report and edited the default filter, and it inadvertently affected everybody else. This one, the person that called in for tech support. So just be very careful about pre-filling in the filter. Now, if you need a report that you filter the same way every single time, like say this was a particular vendor you want to run this report on a regular basis, I will show you how to make a custom filter, okay? Do not change the default filter as far as the criteria goes, okay? I'm going to go ahead and save this because I did add some things to the elements, and I'm going to keep those in there. But I'm going to back out and be back in my template. Now at this point, we have gone through all of the buttons starting with layout. The one other button that I'm going to touch is this appearance button. All the other ones are related to design. If I click on appearance, this is where I can change my different font styles. Now what I do a lot of times is I will make my totals stand out just a little bit more than everything else, okay? So that way, when I get the report, it's very easy for me to pull out that subtotal information. Okay, let's just put the date in here. Okay, that way I know what day it was made. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now it doesn't have any issue with me saving it because I'm not duplicating the name. Okay, now I usually stay in edit mode while I'm testing my report, because if I need to make changes to it, I don't want to have to go back into edit, get into the right spot. I want to already be in edit mode, and then I can make the change. So I'm going to go ahead and click on print. Now you'll notice this is where I would see a subtitle if I put it. This is, I can go in and change the filter to use a different filter if I chose to. I could also change my orientation. If I didn't think to do it while I was building the report, I could do it just before I ran the report. I'm not setting any record limit, and it knows to pull my retail price level, okay? Now, because on-hand reports do not give you the ability to put in a time frame, it is important that you run this report. Understand that this report is going to give you your on-hand as of that moment. So if your accountant needs to know what your end of month numbers were, make sure you run this report after you close on the last day of the month. Or we can automate it to run on the last day of the month. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little later on in today's webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK and take a look at what I got. Okay, so as you can see, this dotted line right here lets me know where the edge of my paper is. So you see how it's repeating the DCS on every single line and the vendor on every single line? I need to make some changes to my report. So I'm going to close this and don't save it. I'm going to set this to non-repeat mode, yes. I also need to go and make some changes. I'm going to take last date sold off. I think I'm going to go ahead and take the margin off, okay? Now, there are other ways that you can make room on a report. The easiest way is to change your appearance, change your column headings and your details By default, they are an Arial 8, but if you make them an Arial 7, it will shrink it down enough to where it fits, but it's still quite legible when it's printed. Okay? So, and if you're going to export it to Excel, it doesn't matter what size you make it. You can always make it bigger in Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and say that, and then now I think I'm going to go back and put my margin back on there because I really did want it. So I'm going to save my changes, click on print, click OK. I now fit, just by me changing that font size and taking that one field off, I now fit. Okay. Now let me see if I add last sold date back in there, if I fit. I'm a little surprised. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. The reason I can't show you the non-repeat mode is because item number was first and no two item numbers are the same. So I'm going to save this, see if this prints. It all fits. So this is what non-repeat mode set to yes would look like. It prints the information that they all share in common on the first line. Here's my color, and then here's all my different sizes. Then here's the next color, all my different sizes. The next color, all my different sizes, and then my subtotal. Okay? My subtotal by the DCS, my apparel women's blouse. Okay? Then I go into apparel women's jeans, same thing. So just to show you again the difference, it's just one quick flip of the switch to change it from yes to no, and it makes all the difference in the world. Okay? Now, I do generally recommend for an on-hand report that you leave this set to no, because it especially if you're not doing any subtotaling, the subtotal lets me know where the break is, where I went from this vendor to this vendor or this department to this department. So that subtotal shows me where the break is. So that's something very visible that I can see. But if I did not have a subtotal, then it would be more difficult to tell where, so let me switch it to yes. It's more difficult to tell where that break is. So, you know, this vendor, this department might take up 3 or 4 pages in your data. In mine, I have very, very limited data, so I don't have very much of it. So mine is easy to see when it switches over. But yours may be pages and pages of one department or one vendor. So because of that, I do recommend that the non-repeat mode is set to no for item detail on-hand reports. If you're just doing it on-hand by DCS, don't worry about it. It's not gonna make a difference. Okay. Now, when you close out of a report, you will get this message. You know, it's not saved. Do you want to save it? Except for on-hand reports, I'm going to suggest that you always say no, because what it's asking you is if you want to save a soft copy of that report. And with the exception of on-hand reports, any report that you run, say you run a sales report for last month, and you decide not to print it. Well, 6 months from now, the owner says, I need to know what we sold last month. You can always go in and run it again and bring up the same exact report that you ran today. An on-hand report is not as easy to do. An on-hand report, like I said, is as of this moment. So if you don't save a soft copy of that report or you don't print it, there's not an easy way to get back to what those numbers were today, 6 months from now. So one of the reports that I will make with you today is how to get yourself back to that moment in time, because it does sometimes happen that you forget to run a report. So I'm going to go ahead and set this back to no, because that's what I prefer on my on-hand reports. And that report is now done, ready to use however I want to use it. Now, I can take this report. If I don't want hundreds and hundreds of pages worth of report, which is what you will get with an on-hand report, be prepared. They will always be the longest reports that you run. anything that involves item on hand information. It's like everything in your inventory. So it's always going to be really long. And if all you're looking to do is give the accountant or the tax guy your information, and you run this type of report at the item level, then just give them the last page. Go to the last page, print out the last page. All they're looking for are these numbers down here at the very bottom. Here's my value at cost. Here's my value at retail. You can tell I have very, very little inventory. Okay? Now yours typically would not say 2 of 2 pages. Yours more than likely would be like 500 or 600 pages, depending on how much inventory you have. Now, just to give you an idea of how much sort plays into this, I'm going to take this same report, make a copy of it, and I'm just going to relabel it a little bit. And I'm going to put in here DCS value. Okay? That way, I know that this report is only showing me the value at the DCS level rather than at the item level. Okay? And again, it shows up there because I left the exclamation point. Now I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to take everything but the DCS off of my descriptions. Okay? I'm going to take the last date sold off because who knows what item it was that sold last, just something from that department did. But most importantly, I'm going to go to my sort, and I'm going to make my sort match that. Okay, so I have just DCS in my sort. I have just DCS as my only descriptive field. Okay, I'm going, now with this one, I am going to change this to portrait because I don't need it landscape anymore. And I am going to set the non-repeat mode to yes. Okay, and then I save it, and I go to print, click the OK, and that little change, so you'll see I have my report set up to do a subtotal by DCS, but do I really need that subtotal? I mean, it's just redundant of the line above it, and it's doubling the length of my report. So because I'm still in edit mode, I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to edit that and change it. So if I take away the when, I have to take away the what. If I take away the what, I have to take away the when. You have to use both in conjunction. Now, some of you may have come across a message. I'm just going to put this in there. You may have come across a message that looks very similar to this. Subtotal, run total, when, not defined. That's because I don't have anything in the when, but I have something in the what. Now, if I do the opposite, I do this, and then I click on print. Now it says subtotal, run total, what, not defined. So I look to the subtotal what or the run total what. I don't have anything above the line here, even though I told the computer when to give me a subtotal. I didn't tell it what to give me a subtotal on. So if you ever get this message, either one of those variations, that's exactly where the problem is lying. So I'm going to click OK, double click that out. Now there's no when, there's no what. I'm going to save this, go to the print button, and now I have each department code, how many I have on hand, the cost, the price, the margin, and my grand total. My grand total is the same no matter whether I have the item detail or not, because the bottom line is the bottom line. That's not going to change. Okay? Now, I probably, if this was me, I probably would add into that, just for argument's sake, put in the department name to go with the DCS, because my accountant is not going to know my department codes. My, my consultant is not going to know my department codes. So I might add in my department name just for clarification for anyone that does not work in the store. Okay. Now my department name has not been expanded, so you're not seeing the whole thing, but I can easily affect that by backing out to the main screen of the reports, and I'm going to come down to field links. Now, by default, the department name is set for 10, But in reality, we have up to 30 characters there. So I'm going to increase that, go back into my summaries, highlight the report I just made, and click on print. And just that one little change made all the difference in the world. Okay? So that is how the sort and the layout can drastically affect a report. The only difference between this report and this one, in reality, is how much I have in the sort and how much I have in the layout. Again, the more you put in the sort, the more detail you're going to get. It has multiple fields to drill down to find a uniqueness. The less you put in there, the less there's available for it to drill down to. So that's always kind of a good rule of thumb. Okay? So let's go ahead and back out of summaries, and let's talk about journal reports. So like I said, journal reports are the only transactional-based report that will optionally allow you to see the items that were on that particular document. Okay, so I'm going to go into journals. Now, I'm going to take this default sales receipt journal right down here. I see it's a default based on the file name. Same numbering sequence applies here as it does in summaries. Same in merchandise and list. The biggest difference is the ending. This J portion of this lets me know that it's a journal. This is a journal invoice, or the old term for receipts. This is a journal PO, a journal SO. So I can kind of tell what, this is vouchers. I can kind of tell what document I'm looking at based on that file name. Okay. In summaries, same thing. They're all going to start with an S. When we're in merchandise, they're all going to start with an M. Lists all start with an L. Okay. So I'm going to take this receipt journal, and I'm going to make a copy of it and relabel it. And I think I'm just going to use the date because that seemed to be the easiest way to do this. Okay, look. Okay, and then put my exclamation point there because I want it to sit up at the top so it's easy to find. And then I will click the OK button. Now, because I have a few reports that alphabetically, from the exclamation space, alphabetically, they come before my sales reports. Okay? So I'm going to highlight my new report and click on Edit. Now, what you will notice, probably first and foremost, is that we have almost all the same buttons that we had in summaries. Okay? There are a few minor differences that I am going to point out, but for all intents and purposes, journal reports get built the same exact way as summary reports. So the first thing I always do when I'm building a report is get rid of all the fields that I don't want. That gives me a good idea of how much room I have to add in the fields that I do want. So I don't need company name because I don't sell to companies. I'm a single store, so I don't need to see what store I'm selling it out of. So I'll get rid of that. Receipt number, receipt date, receipt time, all good information, but do I really need to know the exact second that something was sold? If I have the receipt number and I have the receipt date and I really need to see the time, I can always go look at that receipt in former receipts. So I'm going to take the time out because it's not as critical to me. Okay, I want to know who rang it up. I want to know what the original price was, if there was any discount, and then what the selling price was. Now, I may want to take one of these discounts out. Do I need to see the percentage as well as the dollars? That's your call to make. It's your report. In my report, I'd rather see the percentage because that's going to clue me in if the percentage is higher than I was expecting. Whereas the dollar amount, I'm not going to immediately notice that that number is too big. So I'm going to take that out. Then we see that I have receipt tax in there. I have shipping dollars without tax. That's what the W-2 means. Fees without tax. My receipt total, and then the tender name of how it was paid. Now understand that the tender name will say credit card, it will say cash, will say checks, but if they split their payment, it will not show you credit card cash. It will say split. And you would have to go look at that receipt to see how it was split. Okay, so I'm going to take that off there because I don't particularly care for my purposes how it was tendered out. I just want to know that it was sold. Okay, so as you can tell, I trimmed away a lot of the excess. Now, I might want to put customer on here. So if there was a customer on the receipt, I want to see, that customer's name. And you'll notice down here that I have a variety of different options. I can do just their last name, just their first name, okay? Or you can do this half size, quarter size inverted. I almost always go with the quarter size. Literally, half size is going to be half the width of your paper. It takes up way more room than it absolutely needs to. In 20 years, I have not seen any customer name not fit in the quarter size in all the customers that I've worked with. And there's been some really long, elaborate, combined names as people get married and divorced and married and divorced. They start combining all these names that they've used into one. And sometimes the names can get pretty long, but I've never seen it not fit into the quarter size. Now, the quarter size inverted would be last name first. So if you want to see your name's last name first, then use the quarter size inverted. Okay, so that's the field that I want to add there. I have my tax, my shipping, my fees. I think I'm good. I don't think I need anything else on this report, but just in case, I'm going to take a quick look down. I might want to add in the comment if I use comments a lot, which I don't. So if I use global discounts, I might want to put that on there. Now, my system is set up to spread global discounts, so that way I see it as a line item discount, okay? And the discount that I have up above will show me that total discount. Okay, so I will get that discount there, okay? So nothing else that I want to add here. I'm going to come over here to sort. Now, again, I don't need store because I'm a single store and I don't need it to break down between stores. I want it to break down by the receipt number, and the system requires that on journal reports, the document SID is part of the sort. Now, SID stands for System Identification Number. It is a 16-character identifier that is unique to every single document. You have them on every inventory item, on every customer, on every document. It is what makes each item in inventory unique and each customer unique, even when you have customers with the same name or you've cleaned house and reused item numbers. Each time you do that, it does issue a brand new SID for the new item. Even though it's an old item number that's being reused, it gets a new SID. So that's why it's required, and if you take it out of there and try to save it, it will tell you to put it back, and it will not let you finish doing what you're doing. So rather than fight with it, just leave it there. It is going to give you unique, specific information about each receipt, and that's really what you're going for with the journal, okay? So we're going to leave our sort just as it is. We're going to go to the totals. Now with this, my subtotal options are based on what my sort is. And so I only have the two things in my sort. The receipt number is going to be unique because every receipt number is different. My document SID is going to be unique. So do I really want to get a subtotal after every single receipt? Considering that I have receipt total as one of my column headers, as one of my fields. So I don't really need the receipt total. I don't need a subtotal by my receipt total. Okay? So I'm not going to do any subtotal, run total when. I'm not going to do any subtotal what or run total what, but I am going to get a grand total. Okay? So I'm going to pull everything above the line and get a grand total of everything that every receipt that we run it for. Okay? Now I'm going to skip over ranking because I'm not trying to put my receipts in dollar amount value. I'm trying to put them in chronological order. Okay? So I'm going to skip over ranking and I'm going to go to options. Okay? Okay, so now I'm on options, and hang on real quick for me. I'm just repositioning myself. Okay, so if I go to options, I have mostly the same fields that I had before. I can change my report name, I can change my access level, give it a subtitle if I choose to. Now, because the last report we did was an on-hand report, it didn't have a field for the date and time. Know that all reports except for on-hand will have that as an option, regardless of the type of report that it is. So now if I know that I want to run this for a certain time frame, every single time that I run it, then then I can set this to be a dynamic date that changes with the computer. So I'm going to set mine, because I don't do a lot of sales, I'm going to set mine to be year to date. So right now, that takes me from January through today, but if I run this report tomorrow, it would be through the 28th and so on and so on. So I'm going to default it to a dynamic date so I don't have to worry about going in there and changing it every time that I run it. The filter that I'm using is a default sales filter. So again, don't make any changes to it. We'll make a custom one, okay? I am going to turn this landscape. Okay, non-repeat mode is set to yes, that's fine. We're going to have a separate receipt number on each line anyway. Line feed after data block. This would give you a blank space after each line of data, which doubles or triples the length of your report. I have never seen that really used a great deal, except for one time. I had a client that built it into her purchase order report. So when she was at market sitting down with her vendors, she could make notations. There was a blank spot after each line that she could make notations on. So she found that that was a helpful way for her to have everything on one sheet. Here's everything I ordered. Here's the notes that I've taken about what I've discussed with my vendor. So, which I thought was a very creative way of using it. Record limit, we're going to skip over that. The receipt types allowed. Okay, this is important. I just wanted to look at sales and returns. I don't care about lost sales. I don't care about check in and out. I don't care about high security, not for this report. Okay, so I'm going to leave it as is. Canceled reversed receipts. This is defaulted to normal, but if you were trying to look at a receipt journal for all the receipts that got reversed, I would want to check these two. Okay, canceled would be the ones that somebody backs out of, the high security ones primarily. Okay, so depending on what you choose in receipt types will kind of depend on what you choose in this line. Okay, use net sales value. I usually set this for yes. Now, these are 3 additional fields that you will only find in a journal report. Okay, show item detail. Remember I said that you can optionally choose to see the items that were on the receipt. So I'm going to set this to yes. I can optionally choose to see the tax information. In this case, I'm not going to do that. I also can show the kit or package information. Again, I'm not going to do it with this report. Okay? Excuse me. Now, once I'm done with my options, when we were in Summaries, the next button was Edit Filter. But in Journals, we have an additional button, and that's the Details button. Because I told it I wanted to see my item details, that's what I'm going to set up right here. Now, you'll notice it says Item Details here. Watch what happens if I change this to yes. Now I have I'm a little surprised. I was expecting to see tax details up here. Maybe it's because I don't have a lot of tax details on my report. Okay, so I'm going to go to Details. This is the information I want to see about the item. Well, most importantly, I want to get these in the proper order. I don't care to see cost on here because my clerks might see this and I don't want them to see the cost, but I do want to see description too. So I'm going to add description to my details, put it right where I want it to be. So now I see the specific item, the department, the vendor, all of the information about the item, how many we sold on this receipt, what the unit price was, and which items were given a discount. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Lastly, you'll see there is an edit filter, and just like in Summaries, don't change it unless all you're doing is adding elements. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then I'm going to click on Print. And first, I'm going to show you what it looks like with no detail, because it'll be a pretty big difference that you'll notice. Okay, so no detail, pretty straightforward. Now, I'm missing a lot of sales date ranges in here, but it shows me receipt number, date, cashier, customer, all the basic information about the sales that I've done. Okay, now I can close this, run this again, and leave the show item detail to yes, and click it again. Now it looks vastly different than it just did. Okay, it's still the same information. The difference is this indented section that you see right here. So receipt number 136152. It was rang up in April. You know, all this information across the top. These are the items that were part of that transaction. Then I come down here. These are items that were part of this transaction. Okay, so that's showing the item details. The ones like these first few up here, these first two, these were transactions where the only thing that was charged was a fee or shipping charges. So there were no items on there. That's why we don't see any items on those receipts. Okay? And then if I go to the very last page, now the one thing I didn't do was to increase my total section. So I am going to close this and not save it. And I'm going to go to Appearance, Totals. I think I'll just make it 9 right now. Save it, and then I'll try it again. If I go to the very last page, I do still see my totals big and bold. Okay. So any questions so far? We're about 2/3 of the way through. Any questions on anything that I have covered so far? Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and continue forward then. So I'm going to back out to the main screen, and we're going to look at the last type of report. Now, merchandise reports are a little unique, and that's why I want to make sure that we go in there. Okay, the way that you build them is a little bit different. So I want to see what I have in here. So I want to make a new report, and there's no default report in here that's going to give me what I want. And what I'm looking to do is I want to see what I have tied up in purchase orders. So what do I have coming due in the next 30 days? What do I have coming due in the next 60 days, 90 days, 120, and so forth? Because especially for those of you that carry apparel, you know that you're always ordering 2 seasons ahead, 1 or 2 seasons ahead. So the orders you're placing right now are last-minute holiday orders and spring orders. Okay? In springtime or in January, you're buying for the summer. So you need to, sometimes it's hard to remember what you did, what you bought. You know, we all get a little forgetful, and so I do like to make an on-order report. So I'm going to start with a new one and not copy any that are in here. So when I start a new report, it immediately brings me to the report name, and I am going to call this purchase order upcoming shipments. Okay. Now, I am going to go ahead and save this because there is one setting, because this is the type of report I'm making. Excuse me. Oh, you know what? I actually was going to make the former on hand. So I will say exclamation on hand for old time frame, because that's what it is. Okay. I know that I'm going to want to change this. Okay. We'll leave it on sysadmin. The filter I'm going to use, I'm going to set this to the item. Okay. I know I'm going to need this to go landscape just because of the number of fields I'm going to put in there. Okay. Now, here's where it changes a little bit. Whereas with the summaries and the journals, we start out on layout. If I go to, so with the merchandise report, we're not going to start with layout. We're going to start with our data types. We're going to tell the system what areas or what time frames we want to look at. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to open up this line, and you'll see there's nothing in here right now. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add. These are all the different areas of the system that you can set up as a data type. So first thing I'm going to do, this is going to be a report that allows me to go back in time and figure out what my on-hand was at a certain time frame. I'm going to take it back to December 31st, 2018, but how you set your time frame really depends on how far back you need to go. Okay, I'm going to start with the current on-hand. That's my starting spot. So my description, I'm going to put right in there as on-hand, and column header of on-hand makes sense. Okay, I might just say, you're limited on characters, so let's do that. On hand now. Okay. Now that gives me my starting spot, but I'm going to need to know what I received. So, or I'm going to say what my net sales were, because I'm just going to take them in line. So what did I sell? I'm going to say sales year to date, because I'm taking it back to the 31st. I'm going to do this here, so also sold. And I'm going to set this as a dynamic day range and set it year to date. So I want to see everything that I sold since December 31st. And everything that I sold, I'm going to add back into my on-hand number, because I have to pretend those sales didn't happen. December 31st, they hadn't happened yet. So now I'm going to add in my net receiving. And again, everything that I have received so far this year, I need to take out of my inventory as if I never received it, because on December 31st, I had not received it. So I'm going to again set this to year to date and click OK. Next, I'm going to add in adjustment memos. I know that's a little out of order. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here. The reason I'm doing this, these three fields, everyone would choose these first three fields if you were trying to get back to it. The last one I need to enter in would be the net transfers. That would only come into play and need to be added if you were a multiple store. So I'm going to add in net transfers. Okay, and we're going to go trans. And again, I'm going to set it for year to date. Now, the thing with adjustment memos and with transfers is when we are doing the math. Now, this report is not going to give you that number you need, but it's going to give you the numbers you need to get back to that number. You're just going to have to do a little bit of manual math in the process. Okay? So I have 5 data types here. This is going to be important when we look at the layout. Okay? I have 5 here, and usually I recommend that if you have more than 3 data types, write them down so you can keep track of them, especially if you're having a hard time keeping track of which one's which, okay? Because they will all start to look the same. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and it now knows I have 5 data types. Now I'm ready to go to my layout. Now with this report, because I'm going to be grabbing 3 fields for every data type, that's 15 fields. That doesn't leave me a lot of room for any descriptive fields. I'm going to do this report by DCS, okay? And for accounting purposes, that's really all you need, because your accountant just needs the bottom line number. That's all they're looking for, okay? You'll notice all of these other fields can be added in depending on, what you're doing with this report. But I'm going to scroll down until I get to the DT section, or the data type section. Now remember, we had 5 DTs set up. For each of those DTs, I want to see the quantity on hand, I want to see the cost, and I want to see the price. Okay? So if I look, I now have quantity, cost, and price. Now I'm going to go down a little bit further. They're all in order, and they're always in the same order: quantity, cost, price. Come down to the 3s: quantity, cost, price. Now merchandise reports, while I'm doing this, just to show you, you may notice that these offer to give you average unit pieces of information. Merchandise reports are also the only ones that can give you percent to total quantity. So if I was doing that on this particular report, I would want to see what percentage of my sales does this department code represent. Do I sell more women's blouses or more women's sweaters? Probably depends on the time of the year, to be quite honest. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to get down to the DT5s. Do the same thing. Okay, now I'm going to scroll up. Now it's time to rearrange. What I have found over the years is to make this a little easier on everybody concerned, put all the quantity fields together, put all the cost fields together, okay, and then all the price fields together. That way when you're doing the math, it's easier because they're right there next to each other, okay? So I have 1 through 5 of quantity, 1 through 5 of cost, 1 through 5 of price, okay? Even landscape, this is going to be a pretty tight fit, okay? Now, just like we had in the other reports, we do have to set up the sort. My sort is already the way I need it. I am only sorting by the DCS, okay? My totals, I don't need any subtotals or run totals, but I do need the grand total. That's kind of the whole purpose of this report, is to get that grand total, okay? I'm not going to use ranking. I'm going to go to options just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. And then I'm going to save this report, and I'm going to click on print, okay? Now, with merchandise reports, if you need to change the time frame, the only way that you can change the time frame is to click here where it says data types, open up the one that you want to see and go to properties and change it from a dynamic date range to whatever date range you want. You can even use a fixed period if you needed to, okay? I'm going to leave it on year to date though for what I want. But you would have to do that for each of these time frames. So let's say you forgot to run your end of month, June 30th, end of the second quarter. So the accountant needs to see what the value is the end of the second quarter. You would set this instead of year to date, you might make it a fixed period from July 1st through August 27th. Okay, because that's how far after the end of the quarter or end of the half that you need to figure out what you did in that time frame. Okay, so I'm going to click OK and then OK again. So this report, as you can tell, does not fit landscape. Now, yes, I can take my font down if I really need to, or I can export it to Excel, which is what I was going to do with it anyway, because I'm going to let Excel do the math for me. Okay. But ultimately, what we are doing, sorry about that, my Excel was on my other monitor, okay? So I have my on-hand now quantity, sold quantity, received quantity, memo, and transfer. So I'm going to take this number right here, So what I usually do is I come down here and I build my formula right here in this field. So I want to take this number, I want to put the sales back into the inventory because originally those 44 units that we sold came out of the inventory when we sold them. So I'm going to add this number, I'm going to minus anything that I've received, and because my memo is a negative number, I'm going to add that number back in because I did that negative 217 sometime this year, and if I'm going back to December 31st, it hasn't happened yet. Same thing with transfer. If the number is positive, you're going to make it negative. If it's negative, you're going to add it back in. And in this case, it doesn't matter what we do. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then press enter. That's my on-hand quantity, December 31st, 2018. Now I would repeat that process for my cost, repeat that process for my price. Okay? So come over here to this field right here, and if you want to duplicate this right here, you can just take this formula, copy it, come over here, and we're going to paste it in there, and we just change all of the fields. So instead of 24, or instead of B, we want to see G. Instead of C, we want to see H. Instead of D, I. You could also rebuild this yourself. I mean, it's up to you. Okay. And lastly, K. And then I press enter. Oh, I put it over here instead. So let me undo that. Okay. We'll come over here and I'll just build it again. So equal sign. I want this number right here plus this number right here minus what I received plus what I adjusted plus what I transferred. Press enter. Okay, come over here, do the same thing, put in my equal sign so it knows I'm building a formula. I want my on-hand now plus any sales minus any receiving plus my adjustments because they're negative and plus my transfers. You could have gone minus there as well. So this is what my inventory was worth December 31st. Okay. Obviously, it's easier and quicker to just run an on-hand report before you head out for whatever New Year's Eve plans you have. Run that on-hand report after you close on the 31st or before you open on the first day of the new year, whether that be November 1st or November 2nd. If you don't open until November 2nd, then you have that extra day grace period to get this report ran. Save a soft copy of it in the computer. You can go back and retrieve it at any point in time, and it will show you what you had December 31st. Okay, and you won't have to go through all of this. But I do have some customers, even though I've told them that numerous times, they still always seem to forget, and they always end up having to do things this way. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew how to build this type of report because it's probably one of the more common merchandise reports that we make. Now, once you have the reports made that you want, you can automate those to run automatically. Understand, though, that they do have to be what I refer to as static, meaning that there cannot be anything that a human being has to change on that report in order for it to run, because it's going to run in the middle of the night. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our summary report. Here's our on-hand value, okay, my little 2-page on-hand value. And so this is a report that I want to run at the end of every month. I don't want to have to try to remember to do it. The end of the month might fall on my day off. So I'm going to automate this to run automatically. Okay, so I'm going to back out of here, and I'm going to go into report groups. Okay, now I'm going to create a new group, and I'm going to call this my end of month group. Okay? I set the access level for whatever I want. Now I can mix and match reports in here. So I can say, I want my summary report and I want the one that I made. So I'm going to scroll down and look for it. This is the only time that exclamation doesn't really come in handy. So I'm just going to look for it in here with the date, and I double click it. That puts it above the line. Okay, it's now part of my group. I could come in to my journals and I could grab the receipt journal. I might want to make some changes to the date range I'm looking at, but I could grab my receipt journal. I could also go in and grab my on hand for another time frame if I chose to. Okay, you can have as many different reports in your groups as you want. I have a report group. I run the reports here at Big Hairy Dog, and there's a group of reports that I run every Tuesday. There's 22 reports in my group. Now, I don't have mine automated because I don't always run them at the same exact time every Tuesday, but I do have them grouped so I don't have to go through and hunt down each one of them and highlight it, click print, go on to the next one, you know. So if they're grouped, I can click on print and it shows me a list of my reports, and I would click OK, and those reports are going to run right on top of each other. So here's my receipt journal. Okay, I can print this, or I can export it, or I can just simply look at the numbers and then close it. And right behind it is my on-hand report. Now this report, I do recommend that when you go to close it, you say yes, and then that way it saves a soft copy of it so I know what I had on hand at that moment in time. Okay, so you'll see there's my EOM reports. I am going to go change my receipt journal just slightly. So we will change this. I just want to change the time frame. I don't need a whole year, but month to date would work. Now, what's going to happen, I haven't rang up any cells yet this month, so month to date actually doesn't work for me. I should probably leave it on year to date. Year to date would be a lot longer than I would recommend any of you set it for. Okay. Now that I have my report group in there, I can take this report group, let me just shrink this up. It's very important that I pay attention to the file name. Now, in regular Retail Pro, if I go to Tools, on the side here, you should have an icon that says Scheduler. My scheduler is already running down in my toolbar because I do use it every week. So I'm just going to bring up my scheduler, and I'm going to log in. Okay. Now, I can come in here and I can add a new task. I'm going to click on Edit, and I'm going to add a task. So that task name is going to be my EOM. Oh, you know, I realized this is not the right scheduler for what I need to do. So let me shut mine down from the Big Hairy Dog one. Okay, yes. And then I'm going to open up the one from my webinar one. Okay, so where to go? There we go. Okay, so I'm going to open it up. I'm going to come to Edit and then Add Task. My task name is going to say EOM Reports because that's what it is, and I need to be able to recognize that that's what it's going to give me. Okay, I am not doing this to show a message on my screen, although I could. That's not what I'm doing this for. I want it to run the reports program. So I'm going to set Run Program. Now the program name that I want it to run is the reports executable. So I'm going to open this up. I'm down a little too far, so I want to come up to my RPro directory. Well, and I need to here. Okay. My Retail 8, and then I want RPro. There we go. Now, I'm going to scroll down past all the folders until I find reports.exe. There's my reports.exe. That's the program I wanted to run. Now, when it goes to start this program, it's going to start for it in the RPro directory. And you'll notice that the path is exactly the same as what we have up here. And it should do that for you as soon as you click on it. Now the parameters are going to change depending on what you want to do with it. So if you wanted to print to the screen, you're going to use PGS, print group screen. If you wanted to print to the printer, you would put a P at the end, okay? Regardless, I'm just going to do an S. Regardless, you're going to put in a space, and you're going to put in that file name of that group. Now, I can tell you, though, that's 8 numbers there, and they do, the first one is 8 zeros, and the next one is 7 zeros and a 1. Then the next group I made would be 7 zeros and a 2. So I'm literally going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1.rgp. So I told it what program I wanted to run, where to find that program, and once that program is opened, here's what I want you to do. Print this group to the screen. Here's the group I want. Okay? Now, for those of you that are multiple store, you do want to take into consideration your polling cycle. So you don't want to interfere that. You may want to schedule this to go very in the early hours of the morning rather than the middle of the night. And where you schedule it is using this schedule tab up here. Okay. Now, I don't want this to do in an instance. I'm looking for this to happen monthly. Okay. Now, I can do it on the first day of every 1 month. I could do it on the first Sunday or first Monday or first whatever of every month. I'm actually going to do it on the first day. Okay. Just like that. If that day happens to fall on a Sunday, that's what day that it happens to fall on. If it happens, to fall on a Thursday, that's what day it happens to fall on. Okay? But this lets the computer know I want this to happen on the first day of every 1 month. Now, I tell it when I want it to occur. So I might change this to, say, 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay? And because I'm printing it to the screen, what would happen is it would run, and on my computer screen, when I came in, that report would be sitting up on my screen, waiting for me to deal with it however I'm going to deal with it. Okay? But you can determine what time frame that happens, when you want that to start. So I might have it start tomorrow. And then tell it no end date. Just keep, or I might have to have that start on the 1st and give it no end date. So run this report on the first day of every month at 5 o'clock in the morning, and let me come into it when I come in the morning. Okay? Now, I'm going to cancel that because I really don't want that to run every day. But know that you can, there are a few different parameters that you can use there, and you all have access to the different parameters you can set. So if you go to your e-manuals from the main screen, and you come down to Supplemental Documentation, one of the things that it offers in the Supplemental Documentation is what we call command line parameters. And what we were setting up there in the scheduler is considered a command line. So, come on. Well, maybe. Okay, so bear with me. If you can't get to it one way, we'll get to it another way. Okay, there we go. Okay. So the command line parameters, it would be under your supplemental. And what you want to do, these are all of the things that can actually be scheduled to run automatically. So I'm just going to scroll down until I find the reports. I believe it's in this area. Okay. So PGP and then a space and the file name, it prints the specified report group. PGS, a space, and the file name generates the report to the screen. Now, you can also set this up after the PGS. So let me bring this up again. After the PGS, put a colon and then Excel and then your file name, and it knows to print it to the screen and then export it to Excel, or you could put PDF there. Those, whichever way you like to export it. But that does give you the ability to have your report already sitting in your spreadsheet waiting for you to do whatever manipulations you need to do. Okay? But this is where you can find, if you didn't write down the parameters as I was doing it, that's okay, because it's spelled out for you here in the user's manual. Okay? So any questions about anything that I have covered today? I know I've gone over a lot, and I've hit you with a lot of stuff. The best suggestion that I can give you is to get in there and play around. Think of a report that you would like to make, that you think would be really helpful for you. Figure out what type of report it is, and then attempt to make it. And know that the first time is going to take you some time, and you may make mistakes and have to go back and tweak things. But the more you do it, the better and faster you're going to get at it. I was in that same position myself. I came up from version 6. Version 6, we didn't have the ability to make our own reports. So when we got into version 7, we could start to make our reports, but they were all DOS-based. And so, it was a lot, very similar settings, but very different in how you moved around. Version 8 was the first version where we actually had to make reports. And when I first saw what lay ahead of us, I was like, there's no way I can train people in this. There's too many variables. There's too many what-ifs. Focus on what it is that you need out of the report and stay focused on that. And remember the basics that we went over today. Back in the day, the first few times I made reports, it took me 40, 50 minutes to make a report. Now I can usually knock out a report in 5 or 10 minutes, depending on what it is. Summaries, 5 minutes. Merchandise, sometimes a little longer. So, and you too will get to be the same way the more you play with them and realize what you can and can't do in reports. Okay? So I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules. I understand, it's hard to find that 2 hours that you can just kind of shut yourself off from the rest of the store. But I do appreciate you showing up today. And like I mentioned, a link to this video will be posted up on YouTube within the next day or two, and you should receive that in an email from our service department. Again, thank you guys so much for joining me, and feel free to join us on any upcoming webinars. We will be posting our 2020 schedule within the next month or two, so feel free to hop up, on our website and look at our upcoming schedule. Or if you have any suggestions for a webinar that you really wished we do a webinar on a certain topic, please don't hesitate to let us know that as well, because we're constantly looking for new ideas. Okay? So again, thank you, and I hope you all have a great evening. Bye-bye.